Okay. Okay, so after I present, you will hopefully learn or get a basic understanding of language deprivation. You will be able to examine the academic achievement gap of deaf and hard of hearing students through samples. And then you'll be able to identify some strategies and solutions. And last but not least, you'll be familiar with some free sign language websites. Okay. Okay, so before I talk about language deprivation, it is really important to understand language acquisition. Now, I know some of you here are educators, so you're very familiar with language acquisition, but it's a good reminder for all of us. So language acquisition is how humans acquire language, how you pick up vocabulary, language patterns, grammars, your understanding of the English language. That all involves language acquisition. So from birth through the age of 5, that is the most critical time for acquiring language. So here you can, if you see in my diagram, I have from birth through 5 and what happens during that time period. So when babies are born, they start acquiring language before they're born, but when they are born, they do start picking up language. They don't use it, but they are observing and they're watching, they're listening, and they're listening to the way words go together and how everything sounds. They hear the tone, they hear the exclamation marks, they hear it in your language, but they don't use it. But when they turn 1, they start picking up and start copying the way you use language. And then they start to utter 1 word, 2 words, speaking in short sentences. So by the time they're 2, they may have acquired 50 to 100 words. And then by the time they're 3 years old, they may have a vocabulary of 500 or more words. And it depends on, everybody's different. So that may be the average amount of words that a 3-year-old will have acquired by the age of 3. Then by the time they're 5 years old, the average child has acquired 2,100 words or more. And again, some children have a lot more vocabulary than that. And it depends on the exposure and the access in the home. And by that time, that age, children can speak in almost complete sentences or complete sentences. They use 4 to 8 words in a sentence. And it's usually grammatically correct. They understand the English word order. They use parts of the speech, which is the nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and that includes use of verb tense. They can talk about the past, the present, and the future. And that's just to name a few. There's a lot more that's involved in acquiring the language, but you have an overall picture because some of you have children who can hear, and you've heard them speak, and you know that they are using the language appropriately because they've had that access from birth. By the time they start school, they have a very good, strong English language foundation and understand how words connect to make sentences and meaning. And by that time, they have that background and they're able to participate and engage in all of their classes, which is a variety of classes like science, social studies, PE, language arts, and math. And even though a lot of the language they learn in school is new, the brain can handle that new information because the brain has already been trained and it's able to carry over the language they have already learned in the home. So it's not overwhelming. Then by age 5, 6, that's when the window of opportunity for acquiring language, it slows down. Now they do say the window of opportunity sort of closes. It doesn't completely shut down, but what that really means is the brain is not absorbing the language like it did from birth through 5. So I want you to hold on to what happens when that window closes. I'll talk about that a little later when we go into language deprivation. Because when that window closes, we'll look at how it impacts deaf and hard of hearing children. Okay. So also before I talk about language deprivation, it's also important to understand the term incidental learning. Okay, this is a term that means it's learning that happens everywhere you go. Or think about your children, how they learn from you in the home, in the car, at dinner time, at church, Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, when you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed, or when it's time to get ready for bed, or story time. There's so much learning happening, but with that learning comes language. And you need the language in order to help your child learn. Now, since most of you here can hear, you may not realize that the way you access language is automatic. It's instant. It doesn't require a lot of work on your part. It just comes in, it goes to your brain, and you hear it, and you understand it, and you know what was said. I don't know for you if it's exhausting, but I don't think it is because it's so automatic. It's like driving a car. You just know what to do, and you just do it. I don't know, is it like that for you? For people who can hear here, I'm curious. Can you tell me, is it easy for you? Anyone want to share? Is there a yes or no? Okay, all right, well, okay, so anyway, but in general, for the most part, it is automatically happens for you. And that goes for children who can hear or children who have access. Okay, now 90% of that incidental learning, it happens just instant, without effort. And only about 10% of the learning is taught directly. That means you don't really teach grammar at home. You don't really teach vocabulary and sit down and say, okay, today we're going to learn about this. We do that if we're helping our child with homework, but we don't do that on a daily basis. So direct instructions does not happen often. It usually starts happening when your child starts school. That's when direct instructions for where it usually happens. So if you think about how you have all learned language and acquired language when you were little, it was probably most likely from hearing your mom or your dad or a family member talking and feeding you that language without realizing it. And you are acquiring and processing that language without realizing it. Does that make sense? Did anybody nod their head? I can't see anyone. Okay, so I can't tell.
Yes, you're getting yeses in the chat.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, so if you take a look at the sample here, there's a family. They are having dinner, and they're also having this conversation about their children's day at school. There's a lot of language happening there, and everybody's interacting and engaging. And if you look at the language, it's not just conversation happening. There's a lot of grammar in there. There's use of pronouns, there's questions, there's numbers, there's verbs, and there's nouns, and there's names. That's language. And that is giving those children an opportunity to acquire that language. And that's the kind of language that kids are exposed to every day in the home. Okay, next slide. Now, that is the case for children who have access to language from birth to 5, and it's ongoing. But for deaf and hard of hearing children, it's a different story. And this is where language deprivation happens. Okay, so hold on, I have to look for the interpreter. Okay, so how many of you have heard the term language deprivation? I can't see the chat, but if anybody wants to just voice it, I can see it in the captions.
So there are a lot of folks that are saying in the chat that, yes, they've heard of that term.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so language deprivation in deaf and hard of hearing children is when they do not have full access to a natural language, whether it's a visual language or a spoken language. It's when they do not have access. Now, there are different degrees. Some have a lot of access, some have some, and some have a little bit, and some have none. So it varies. And then you see how that impacts the child's academic abilities, their reading and writing skills, their social and emotional development, their relationships with people, and their ability to navigate through the world independently. Now I'm going to show you a short video. It's very powerful, and it will give you an idea of what language deprivation is and how it impacts a deaf child. You're going to see two different babies. And what the hearing baby, the baby who can hear and has access, is sort of black and gray. And then the baby who's deaf is blue. So pay attention to the deaf baby, and you will see what's happening when the baby does not get access to language. Oh, but before I begin, just so you know, if you see the statistics there, there's 92% of deaf children have parents who can hear. And all those parents, 75% of them do not sign. They may sign some, they might sign a little bit, but not enough to provide that access to the visual language. Now, I'm not saying all deaf and hard of hearing children need sign language. Everybody's different, but you know your child best, and you will know if your child does need sign language. And we'll talk about that more later. Okay. And then in addition, if you see that 98% deaf children do not have access to sign language in school. So often a lot of deaf, hard of hearing children go to school without the signing support. So I'm one of them. I grew up like that. I had no support. I had to use my residual hearing. I had to lip read, and I had to listen and try to figure out what was being said all day, every day, from elementary all the way to high school. It's exhausting. And so for me, I look back, I realized what I did need was the sign language support. With the spoken language, I needed both. But in the medical field, they advised my mom that not to sign with me because it would impede my speech and I wouldn't speak. And that I didn't need sign language. So that would be an example right there of how children do not have access to sign language in school. Okay, so here's the video. Okay, does anybody want to share their thoughts on that video?
We had someone in the chat say powerful video. Thank you for sharing it.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to move on because I know I only have half an hour left and I want to share two more parts. So now that you have a surface, a basic understanding of language deprivation, language acquisition, and how incidental learning impacts deaf, hard of hearing children if they do not have access to a natural language. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at how language deprivation impacts deaf and hard of hearing children academic achievement. And I'm going to take you into high school because the team and I, which is myself and Miss Aristi, who's here, we tend to work with the kids who are coming from elementary school. And we are sort of the last people to shape the deaf and hard of hearing child. We have 4 years to do whatever we can to prepare them for college or the work world. Actually, we have up until they're 21 for some who decide to stay. So 6 years. You may think 6 years is a good number, but based on data and the situation of deaf and hard of hearing children who arrive to high school, 6 years is not enough. So now we're going to look at some samples of deaf and hard of hearing students' reading and writing skills for those who are language deprived. Oh, I forgot one thing. I forgot something. Let me back up. About incidental learning in deaf and hard of hearing children. So remember that the access is either absent, they get some access, or it's very limited. Now, some children do have access to the visual cues on a family member, like the facial expression. Maybe mom or dad is smiling. So the child knows, well, maybe that's a good thing, but what is that good thing? Where's the language involved in that? So facial expressions are good, gestures are good, but there's no language. There's still no language access. No, there's some. Okay, now also I know a lot of people use universal signs like good job, thumbs up. Most people, okay, can figure that out. Something's good. Okay, but this sign probably could mean many things. So if mom's trying to say, you did a great job today, thumbs up. If mom only does this, but mom really meant, you did a great job today, all of that language right there, there was no access. Maybe the child saw you because mom maybe pointed. So maybe the child has an idea, oh, I think you're talking about me. But where's the rest of that language? That child didn't get access to that language. So right there, there's the delay. So every time the child's not getting access, there's a delay. And the delay keeps getting wider, wider, and wider, and wider. So by the time they arrive to school, which is kindergarten, they're delayed sometimes between 1 and 4 years. And then that gap continues to get wider and wider. And the delay becomes 7+ years. So usually when they arrive to high school, 9th grade, they're 14 years old, they may be functioning 2nd, 3rd grade. The average is 3rd grade. A few are above 3rd grade, maybe 4th, but it's still on a level where they're struggling. With what? Language. Language comprehension and language and reading comprehension. Okay, so, and one last thing, in the red bold, there are many deaf and hard of hearing children who are aided. They wear a hearing aid or they wear a CI, and some do great, and some can access beautifully. And some still struggle to access language with a CI or a hearing aid. And remember, every situation is different. Every environmental situation is different. So in the home, a child might have better access because it's a small group or it's one-on-one with mom or dad or sister or the sibling. It's a little easier to access the language. But when the environment changes and it becomes larger and there's more people, it's harder to access. Even though you can hear, you can't always understand speech. And that's what it's like for some who have a CI or a hearing aid. And I wear a hearing aid. I do access language with my hearing aid, and sometimes I don't need signing or the support, and I can function fine without support. And then there are some situations where I need a sign language interpreter all the way. And then sometimes I need the interpreter, and then I look at this speaker who's talking and I'll look at the interpreter. So it depends on the situation. So keep that in mind. Every situation for accessing language is going to be different. Oh, I realized I skipped. So here's an example of language deprivation, the perfect example, dinner time. I don't know if you notice, maybe your child sits at the dinner and then all of a sudden your child gets up and leaves the room or is on their phone or does their own thing while everyone else is chatting and laughing and telling stories. That's a perfect example of where language deprivation happens. And as you can see, that child is wondering, what's so funny? What are they laughing at? Because they do see the visual gestures on their face. They see everybody laughing. They know that's laughing. They know they're happy and think something's funny, but what? Or maybe it's not even something funny. But that's what it's like to be in that child's shoes. And all that language happening right there, it's not accessible.
So we had someone in the chat that said, I was blessed to be able to learn spoken language with the residual hearing I have left. However, I did struggle with lip reading others, struggled with reading comprehension, and struggled when engaging in group conversations, and struggled with written language grammar. Sign language has helped me tremendously.
So you figured that out later or at an early age? Which?
She said she learned sign language at age 22.
Oh. So when you look back, what do you think or what would have benefited you? What would have benefited you if, when you look back?
Hold on. Wow. Looking back, I realized I missed so much. I never realized I was really language deprived. And when I learned sign language at the age of 22 and I went to Gallaudet University, I saw a whole new world. And looking back, I realized, wow, I really missed. There were gaps in conversation. Struggle with reading comprehension. It was just, there's so much to say in a short amount of time. But yeah, the experience. I wish I learned sign language at a younger age. And I was always 2 years behind in my language, 2 years behind in my reading. I felt like I didn't fit in. I had to really work hard to really lip read and try to understand conversation, try to fit in. It was a struggle, it really was.
And when you learned sign language and at the same time you still use spoken, it was more of a relief and you could enjoy learning?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Thank you for sharing. Okay, all right. And over here in the next picture, if you see that little girl, that young girl in school, she maybe goes to a mainstream school or she's the only student with a hearing loss, and there is her classmates, her peers who can hear, and they're having a group discussion, and she's not sure what they're talking about. And once again, she sees their visual facial expressions, and it looks like they're laughing or they're smiling, but when you don't know what's going on, you start to become insecure and you start thinking that they're talking about you. And really, they're discussing about a model that they want to build for their science project. That's another example of not having that full access to language. And as you can see, she does have a CI. She may be hearing them, she's not sure what they're saying. Okay, and again, remember, keep in mind, that's not for everybody with the CI. So I'm only speaking for some who we know that struggle. Okay, all right, now we'll go and look at the samples. Okay, so one of the things that Miss Aristi and I do when students arrive to high school, we want to get an idea of their reading level. So this is an informal reading assessment that we use. And it starts from K and it goes all the way up to 12th grade. So there's different passages, reading passages. There's 2 different kinds which are required for students when they enter school. They have to be able to read a narrative passage, which is stories with characters, a plot, a setting. It has a beginning, middle, and an end. And then you have the informational passage, which is more about like topics like science, social studies, space, the earth, history. So it's a different type of passage that you have to read. You have to have a different kind of reading skill. But before you can even have the reading skill, you have to have the vocabulary and the ability to comprehend language. So we like to collect some data to help us understand where our students are reading so that we can better instruct. And we know where to start and how to build on those skills. So in my 25 years since I've been a teacher, and it's not just in school, I have a lot of deaf and hard of hearing friends all over the country. So I can get access to data in an instant. And I will tell you one of the common stories that I hear that has not yet changed is students' reading and writing level tends to be on a 3rd grade. And then there are those who are still reading on a K through 2nd grade. And there are some who do read above 4th grade. But the ones who tend to be in a self-contained class are reading at approximately a 3rd grade. And that doesn't mean independently, it means with support or on a frustration level. Okay, so now what we do is we will administer a list of vocabulary words on 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade level. We might start with 1st grade and we'll administer the vocabulary to see how much vocabulary the student can read, but not only read. Miss Aristi and I know we don't want to just know that you can say the word or sign the word. We want to know you understand the word. So if you sound pretty, but you don't know what it means, we don't count that. We want to know you can read it, sign it, and say it, understand it, and be able to explain the meaning of that word. That tells us you comprehend. So there's a difference between decoding is when you can read the word. And then there's language comprehension. You can read the word and you can understand the word. And then you can read the word in context, that's reading comprehension. So often the kids may sound good and they have decoding skills, but that's it, they've hit that level. But when it's time to demonstrate comprehension, that's where we see the struggles. Okay, so here's a 1st grade passage. It's pretty simple. You know why? It's concrete. The vocabulary in there, you can use your 5 senses to figure out what these words are, like black cat. You can easily look at a picture of a black cat and you can teach the vocabulary. It's not hard to learn because the picture's available or the real cat is available. You might have a black cat at home. And then for other words like a door, and you can open a door, those you can use your 5 senses. So it's concrete language. So kids tend to do better on reading and being able to retell the story. However, now, so even though that's a 1st grade passage and it looks pretty easy, a high school student who's reading on a 3rd grade most likely can read the vocabulary, but may not always understand every vocabulary in that 1st grade passage. Why? Because some of those require you to read a phrase, not a word. And because they haven't heard the phrase, they don't know that that word, the group of words like moving out, you got to read it together. Well, you will often see deaf, hard of hearing children will read the word individually, word for word for word for word. And it sounds very choppy and robotic, and you can tell that they're not understanding, they're just decoding. So the reason why I highlighted the words in red, it's either they don't realize that's a phrase and that's an abstract concept, or the word has multiple meanings. You know, the word take has many meanings, and it depends how it's used in context, but often deaf and hard of hearing child only know the one meaning. So they associate that meaning with everything and everything they read. Okay, so that's first grade passage, high school student who reads on a third grade, so they can read it and they can comprehend the story, not independently, maybe with, they need some support, and we have to instruct and teach those phrases. So we have to take time out for teaching the Gen Ed curriculum to reteach the skill that the child does not have, that they should have had over here from birth to 5. So now as we move up to the higher grades, let's go to a 6th grade passage. So let's say we administer, let's just say the student is in high school and is given a passage from let's see what passage that, an English teacher. They have to know those words that I underlined. Those words are pretty abstract. So this student, high school student, they're still reading on a 3rd grade level and they're given a 6th grade passage. So the vocabulary though that I've underlined, they're not going to know the vocabulary. Why? Because on 3rd grade, they didn't have the vocabulary on the 3rd grade. So the 6th grade vocabulary is going to be even more difficult. So this is what it might look like for a 9th grader who's trying to read a 6th grade passage. So if you see, I blacked out the words, that means they don't know those words. They're 6th grade vocabulary words. Remember, they don't yet have the 3rd grade vocabulary words. And then again, the red, I highlighted the red because those are phrases they haven't heard. They might have seen the word in the phrase, but don't realize that peeked out is a phrase and we read it together, not individually. And we often see that in deaf and hard of hearing children. So we have to stop and pause instruction to reteach all that. That's time consuming because vocabulary, you can't teach it one time. You have to teach it again and again and again and again, and until they can retain it in their long-term memory. And then last, let's take a look at a 9th grade passage. It's an informative passage. It's a science passage about caves. And the language is just much more complex and abstract. And even though a 9th grader can probably read this and figure out what the words are because of their background, they have a strong vocabulary and language background, they're able to read unknown words. Well, when a deaf or hard of hearing child looks at that passage, those words probably look like foreign language to them. And so this is what the deaf child is going to see, a bunch of nonsense words, words that don't make sense. So if they try to read that passage, they're going to get frustrated. They're going to shut down and they will tell you, I can't understand it. Okay, so now that's for reading. Now I'm going to show you that's a common challenge with deaf and hard of hearing students' writing skills. Okay, this student is in high school, but is writing on a 2nd, 3rd grade level. And so I want you, okay, I'll read the first sentence. And this is what happens when you don't have access to language. So he's able to use nouns. He's able to write a sentence. He's trying, and he has some basic concrete vocabulary. He can use punctuation. He understands that part. But when he's trying to put the words in English order, that's always where the challenge is. So this is the sentence. It says, boy walk, see to cat, say meow, he pet two cat. His understanding of grammar, he has not yet understand the grammatical words because he hasn't seen it or he hasn't heard it clearly. So the child that did not get access when he was young. And children who do get access, they know how it sounds, so they can write that sentence. The boy walked to see the cat, and the cat said meow, and then he patted the cat. He patted the cat. Okay, he was not able to use ed or past tense. He used the verb, but the past tense was left out. And the rest of that passage is written like that. And so this is what we see on a 9th grade level, 9th and up. And we try to repair those errors, but there's so many grammatical errors, we will never be able to get them to that level where they should be with their hearing pills. So it's an ongoing learning process. And once they leave high school, they have to keep relearning these skills that they should have had a long time ago. Now, when students are in 9th grade, they should be able to write an essay that will look like this. And this is a popular essay that students write in 9th grade called The Sniper. You have to know how to write a claim and support your answer with evidence and understand the structure of an essay. Now, most of the times, deaf and hard of hearing kids, they do understand the structure and know how to organize their information. They're good at that. But when it's time to put the language in order and the sentences and construct the sentences, it's very difficult to understand what they're trying to, the message they're trying to convey. Okay, so this is an example of how a child who's deprived of language is impacted academically. And this is the end results when they arrive in high school. And this is mostly for self-contained deaf and hard of hearing kids. Deaf and hard of hearing students who are out in the mainstream tend to have higher reading and writing skills, but you can still see that they're lagging and there's still a gap. The ones who tend to succeed independently on their own are the deaf kids who have deaf parents. Why? Probably makes you wonder, how is that possible? Because the deaf parent, when their baby is born, they are able to provide the language access, which is a visual language. It's not spoken, it's through the visual language. So that child grows up with the language and they tend to succeed in the general ed setting independently. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about some solutions. And I do know, I want to commend the parents who are here. I know one of the moms had to leave, but I know we have some parents here and they are in my sign language class on Tuesday nights and they've been coming faithfully and they have grown a lot and they are becoming more comfortable with signing and they're fluent in finger spelling and they're there every Tuesday for their child. And I want to say thank you. You are really helping your child. I know it's it's difficult to learn a new language, but once you do learn it, it becomes easier. It's just the initial part, but I think you've gotten past that. So you are helping to resolve that language gap and the academic gap. All right, so before you can use any solutions, you have to, oh, wait, wrong slide. Okay, so kids with cochlear implants and hearing aids. I am a strong supporter of cochlear implants and hearing aids. I wear a hearing aid. My daughter wears hearing aids sometimes. She's not there yet. Okay, I have many friends who wear cochlear implants. And then I have friends who don't wear anything. And it's okay. You know why? As long as they're getting access to language, that's good. That's all that matters. So there is often a misunderstanding about hearing aids and CIs. Okay, it's not like wearing eyeglasses. I have glasses on now. When I take them off, my vision is blurry now. When I put them on, I can see clearly. I don't need any other support for my vision. My glasses do the job. When I put my hearing aid on, I hear better. Sounds are amplified. And voices are amplified. And sometimes the voices are clear to the point that I can understand and I don't need the sign language. But then there's other times when my hearing aid allows me to hear clearly, but I can't understand clearly. It's the speech sounds are muffled. It's just, I can't make out the sound. So I hear. I can't always understand. And that's where people misunderstand cochlear implants and hearing aids. You ask any deaf or hard of hearing person who wears it, and they will tell you that it doesn't, they can hear, but it doesn't always make speech clear. And again, it depends on every situation and environment. Some situations you would think, okay, well, I can access language perfectly. And then you go in a large setting, oh my gosh, I'm not sure. I hear them, but I don't know what they're saying. So that's really important for people to understand about cochlear implants and hearing aids. Okay, and again, when you have a hearing aid and a CI, access to language is not automatic. It's a lot of work. Like Kirsten said, she has to read lips because she's using whatever residual hearing she has left, and she has to work hard to figure it out. It's tiring. And we often suffer from listening fatigue. And by then, your brain dead, you can't function anymore because you're so busy trying to figure out what did he say, but you can't remember what you learned because you're so busy doing this job. It's hard to try to do two jobs at once. That's like me asking you, try to listen to the English and the Spanish at the same time. Can you do that? Anybody with superpowers here who can do that? Or do you think it would be a challenge, it would be a struggle? Okay, I have 3 minutes. Let me move on. Okay, so before you use any strategy or solution, you have to know how your child accesses language. Okay, every child's different. So you have to know if your child has a CI on, you have to know, okay, is my child accessing language like his siblings, like his peers, or everybody in the house? Is he picking up language? Is she or he picking up language? And if not, why not? Is the CI working alone, or does my child need some additional support? So it's important first to know how your child best accesses the language. Okay, I use my hearing aid and I use sign. And then sometimes I only use my hearing aid and I drop the signs. And then sometimes I just use sign. Because I'm aware of how I access language and where I need more support and where I don't need more support. And because your child may be too young to understand that, it's our jobs as parents to understand it and know and recognize and be aware, ooh, my child is not accessing language, or it's accessing some. You don't want to settle for some. We don't want to settle. We want to settle for equal or better. And now my daughter, she's hard of hearing, but I'm preparing her that she could become deaf because my hearing loss is hereditary and I pass it on to her. And she's not thrilled about that. But I'm teaching her she has to embrace it. So even though she struggles to accept the fact that she's hard of hearing, I have to prepare her. And she says, okay, I'm on the way to becoming deaf. She's like, I'm on the way. And I'm like, okay, yeah, and we're going to get through it together. But she's so young and she doesn't fully understand it because sometimes she says, oh, I can hear, I'm hearing, I can hear, which is true. She does hear in some situations. She can function like a hearing person. And then other times I see where her language access is impacted. But she has a different type of hearing loss. So again, you have to study and understand your child. But number one rule, if your child put on CI, hearing aid, the FM, and still not getting access, that says a lot right there. That maybe, just maybe, you need a little bit more support. And it's okay. It's okay. Because if you want to maximize the access, you use two methods. Maybe one works, but maybe two is even better. Spoken and sign. I'm running out of time, right? Does everybody have to go? Do I have to stop?
You don't have to stop, no. I mean, folks can certainly log off if they need to, but please continue if you like.
Okay, I just have a few more slides left. Okay.
And,
All right.
and we want you to know there's someone who does have questions who's waiting patiently till the end.
Sure, please ask away. Oh, do you want me to share the slides first and then, or do you want to ask?
Sure. Let's share the slides. Yvette and I are both monitoring the chat, so we'll share the slides and then we'll take some questions at the end. Does that work for you?
Sure. Okay. All right. So when you want to get your child's attention, there are different ways. If you do call your child and they respond, great. But if they don't respond and you're calling their name again and again, you're going to get frustrated and the child's going to be doing whatever. So one of the things you have to do is you have to physically get up and walk. And you might need to tap the child on the shoulder or flick the light. But you do want to refrain from yelling at the child, hey, or whatever it is you want to say, refrain from yelling, because we take that as an insult. And it doesn't always mean that they're going to hear you clearly. They may hear yelling, but they might not know what you were yelling about. So if your child is tone deaf, it will probably be better if you tap them or you flick the light so they can see the flashing light. But I know if some children are in the room and they have their device on, they may be able to hear you. But this is just one way you can get their attention. But you want to refrain from yelling in their ear. And I know a lot of people aren't aware and they don't know any better. But yelling just makes it worse. And it really does. It's hard for the deaf or hard of hearing person to continue the conversation after you've been yelled at. Okay, now another thing, it's important, you got to get in the communication circle. So you see how the mother's sitting with the child, but she's not looking at him? You want to avoid that setup. The child will need more access to your facial features and your lips. You will be surprised, deaf and hard of hearing children just automatically start lip reading. There's no training that comes with it. It's sort of a survival method, and we just do it naturally. So you will see that your child may depend on the visuals and the mouth. So the lady, she's sitting in position, sitting in front of him. That's probably the best way if you want to teach language and provide language, to sit in front of your child and make sure you have eye contact. And if you're reading to your child, a hearing child, hearing mom can sit behind the child and read the book. That works. But for a deaf child, you want to sit in front, and so they can see your expressions. Okay, so while you're developing your sign language skills, it's like learning any other language. It takes time, and it depends how motivated you are to learn. Some learn quick, some it takes time. So while you're learning, it always helps to learn how to fingerspell words. Okay, I was going to show you a video of myself, and I was teaching my daughter how to fingerspell, because she's not really a signer, she's a fingerspeller. She fingerspells everything. But that's okay, because she's developing her vocabulary. I have been fingerspelling to my daughter since she was born, and now she is fluent. But it not only helps her with spelling, fingerspelling, she can spell words, she reads, and she can recognize whatever she has been fingerspelling. She recognizes it in print. So fingerspelling can lead to vocabulary development and fluency, and it's a natural language. So you start early with fingerspelling. And it's just the same like with learning language. You get the exposure. The child gets exposure, sees, oh, my mom is fingerspelling. She's fingerspelling. And then eventually that child will pick up. And I know we have one mom here, her son is a fingerspeller. And he's young and he's already picking up that skill. That's what you want to see at an early age. Okay. So here's an example of fingerspelling. You start with 3-letter words. C-A-T, cat. So suppose you didn't know the sign for cat. You can fingerspell cat, C-A-T. When you do that, you are giving your child the ability to recognize letters and recognize that letters also form words. So once your child can fingerspell cat, then when it's time to read a book and you see the word cat, you point, the child's going to recognize that that is cat, and your child's going to be able to spell cat. When you consistently do that, your child will develop their vocabulary. And that's more natural because the language is natural language. Okay. This is one thing I do. I teach on purpose. Now, because I knew my daughter, she failed the hearing screening test. And even though it was 1 year, I freaked out because I know what it's like to be language deprived. And I said, I am not allowing that. So I overdid it with my daughter. So I taught on purpose, which means everything in my house that we did, I was targeting vocabulary. So if we were at the store and we were going to Target, I would point to the name of the store. Look, that's Target. And I would say it and I would sign it. And if she said it back, okay, I'm fine, because I know she was accessing it through her listening and through the use of her auditory skills. So what you can do is let Google Images become your best friend. You are lucky now you have Google Images, because we didn't have that in my time. We had to, everything was print and words. So even if you were looking at a meaning, we still wouldn't understand it. But pictures, oh, they will really save your life. And you can teach a lot of vocabulary by just showing a picture and start off basic. So you see there's a picture of a sun, and then you have the boy who's getting some sun, and you can expand the vocabulary. And then you still have the picture and you have the word, and then at the end you just have the word, so the child will be able to recognize the word in print without the picture. So use Google Images. Oh, okay, and that will help you to help the child develop the vocabulary. Wow, okay, and 2 more slides. Okay, 2 more slides. So last slide, it will help if you leave on the closed captions on your TV, on your laptop, on YouTube, on music videos, TikTok. You know, kids are so into YouTube and TikTok. Turn on the captions. Even if your child cannot understand it yet, your child will start to recognize, ooh, they're saying something, and I can read what they're saying. Since I can't understand what they're saying, use the captions at all times and just leave it on the TV. Leave it on. Oh, and phones. As your child gets older, texting back and forth will really help your child develop their writing skills and their grammar skills. Okay, and last but not least, if you want to maximize your child's access to language, you start learning sign language, and you start small because it's overwhelming. So you start small and build on your skills. And when you become comfortable, you can increase your ASL skills. And then you can eventually have conversational skills in ASL. And I was going to show you a video of some babies signing, but I know we're running out of time. But these babies were developing their sign skills. They were signing cookie and dog and tree and milk and more and thank you. And the parents were signing with the child. It was basic. It was just basic vocabulary. 1 or 2 words to start, and then you increase it so you don't overwhelm yourself. Okay, and last, if you need okay, so last thing before I share the resources, just keep in mind the brain. There's nothing wrong with your child's brain. How do I know? Because when they get to high school, they have so much inside of them that they want to come out, but they can't get it out. And when that comes out, it's like, oh, wow, you are such a bright child. And all along we've known that, but they couldn't get it out through the language. So remember, there is nothing wrong with deaf and hard of hearing people. We are not disabled. The only barrier is language. So whether it's a visual access or auditory access, the brain doesn't care as long as it's getting the language access. Okay, so the problem is not being deaf or hard of hearing. The problem is they're not getting access to language. And that's what it means to be language deprived. All right, last thing I'll do is share the resources. If you want to take a picture, these are some of the best websites for learning accurate and up-to-date signs. You have to be careful when you're learning sign language online because some people who are signing are not signing the appropriate signs. These ones are much more reliable. And then the last 2, they're signing ASL stories. It's really beautiful. So take a picture if you want, and then you can just Google those phrases